Okay, you should be able to see the screen right now, but hang on, let me look for something. Okay, I see not one in here. We're going to play a game before something pops in. I'm coming to you live from the barn at Hackberry Farm today, and if you look in that door behind me, we're going to have a little lottery today. The first one, and someone's already noticed it, so that person doesn't count because I hadn't announced it yet. But the first one to see a chicken walk through that door, I'm going to give you a coupon from Pro Prints, a company I do business with, and they help me out with all my workshops. It's a $35 print credit to get a print made from them, and that'll apply to the biggest prints or the smallest prints, whatever. So the if you see a chicken walk in the door back there, pop in. This may be the world's first ever chicken lottery. So photo webinar chicken lottery. I'm going to call it that. Be the first one ever. Uh, so be paying attention back there. Again, welcome everybody. My name is Russell Graves. I'm coming to you live from Hackberry Farm, Dodge City, Texas. It's always a pleasure to do these every month. I was thinking about it this morning, and I think Audrey, you'll agree with me on this one. I was looking at it this morning. This is the 90 in the area that I've been doing webinars over the past few years. This is the 94th one today.
Ooh.
And so I I would never say I'm the best photographer in the world. I'm certainly not the best looking photographer in the world. Audrey, that's what you'll agree with there. I can't hold a candle to Robbie, but you can't say I'm not consistent because I've been doing these for a long time, every single month for a long time, and I'm glad to have you guys along with me. Hopefully, as we go through this, I'll impart a little bit of knowledge to you on some of the things I've learned about how I use kind of a calendar and think about the biological movements of animals to really, I feel like, make me a better photographer. So that's why it's called the mammal calendar, because we're gonna look at the world of nature photography on a mammal's term. So in this webinar today, I'm going to talk about a bunch of things. Number one, uh, I'm going to talk about how the different times of the year and the different months of the year kind of influences what animals that I see the most during that time of year. And when you use that data, it kind of puts you in a better position to be able to be more consistent in taking pictures of of the various kind of mammals. Number two, as we go through this, I'll get a little bit into the nuts and bolts of my settings and everything like that. But again, as always, if you see a picture and you're wondering what I did or how I took it, feel free to chime in there. And I keep looking behind me, thinking I see a chicken. Feel free to chime in and ask any questions about the process behind any image that you have here. This is going to be a little bit on the nuts and bolts of photography, but a lot on why being a better naturalist and being a better at your field craft can make you a better photographer, all in all. And so I'll talk about how the monthly calendar, and then at the end of the webinar, I'll talk a little bit, a few tips on what you can do to be a better not just a mammal photographer, but a wildlife photographer in general and a nature photographer in general. So, with that said, I think we got a full house, as full as it's going to be. If people struggling late, uh, I'll let them in as we go along. But we'll go ahead and get started. Just like us, all mammals live by calendar. You know, the thing that influences them more than anything is uh, the availability of food, their breeding seasons, the weather, and believe it or not, the moon phases. Moon phases affect mammals' movements a whole lot, especially those mammals that, because mammals aren't like birds. A lot of birds, when it gets dark, they go to sleep, like the chickens. They're up and around today, but come nighttime, they'll be in the coop and they'll be asleep and they'll sleep all night. And there's no getting around that. Owls, for example, on Hackberry Farm, we've got a lot of owls here. Uh, we hear they're really active at night, and usually when I see them, it's kind of on the margins of the day. We see them late in the evening, usually, and sometimes early in the morning. But they pretty much live at night. But a lot of mammals, like white-tailed deer, for example, they'll stay out late, get up early, move around during all times of the day, and that movement's usually influenced by the weather, by food availability, by breeding season, and by the moon phases. So to put it pretty simply, it works like this. If it's a full moon night outside, animals like deer tend to move around more in the dark because they can see better at night. So that's some of the things we're going to talk about. And so really the goal is this, just trying to be more consistent and seeing more wildlife when you do go afield and take advantage of that. I've been doing workshops for a long, long time now, and one of the things I realize when I plan the workshops is trying to plan them a little bit, at least according to these calendars, so you're going to be able to have the best opportunities that you can when you go to a particular place. And so here's my methodology, and I say it's pretty simple. It took a little bit of doing to get to this point, but the methodology is pretty simple. I analyzed the metadata for nearly 102,000 mammal images in my catalog. And when I looked at the metadata in the end and figured out when I took the various pictures based on the analysis of the metadata, this is how it all shook out. And I think I'm about to sneeze, so bear with me if I have to. Uh, and by the way, excuse me, I'm sorry. And by the way, that metadata is built into every digital image you take. That's one of the most powerful things I think about digital photography is the fact that it's got all that data embedded in it. You know, I was telling someone the other day that come September of this year, September, yeah, September 1st actually of this year, because I know the exact date, was the is the 20-year anniversary of when I switched from film to digital. And I remember that time because if I go back and I look at uh one of the earliest digital or the earliest digital picture I took just to see if it was worth kind of making the switch to. It was a picture of my daughter. At the time, she was almost 5 years old, and I took a picture of her on September 1st. And I took that image. It was with a 6.3 megapixel Canon 20D camera. Took that image, made it into a 20 by 30 print. To my eye, it looked really good, and I just decided then that's when it was time to uh, to switch from film to digital. And I made the complete switch during that time frame. So 20 years ago, 2005 is when I completely switched to digital away from film. And with film, when I shot slides, you just had the date marked onto the date marked onto the slide that you would look at. But with digital, again, it's all built into the metadata. And so I use a Mac, and this is my point. I use a Mac, and you can use a software program called Photo Statistica. Now, for you PC users, I'm not sure if they make it for that, but you can certainly look. It's called Photo Statistica, and what it does, it'll let you kind of scrape all the metadata in your images, and it puts it together in graphical format. You can do pie charts based on the ISO you most commonly use. You can use line charts based on the focal length you most commonly use. And I find it helpful every few months to go back and analyze that data because it helps kind of help me figure out things like this. I can look at that data and I can look at just bobcats and figure out when is the most likely time I'll see bobcats. Now, I'm always trying to take pictures of bobcats. You could argue that, yeah, well, you're only going out and trying to shoot pictures of bobcats during that time of year. And I try to shoot pictures of bobcats all the time, but the times of the year I'll talk about is the most common amount of time. So that's kind of how I set it up. Now, if there's any uh I hold the title of adjunct professor at a university, but I'm not a doctor, but if we have any college professors in the room today, I'm not quite ready to back this up in my doctoral thesis, but my methodology is a pretty simple way of looking at these pictures. And again, it's just by analyzing the metadata. So as we go along, again, if you've got any questions, pop them into the chat. I've got everything kind of turned off so you can see the clean screen today. Pop everything into the chat, and then I'll go back and cover them all in the end. Again, and towards the end too, if you want to jump on the screen and instead of writing in the chat, ask live, we can answer them that way too. But in January and February, I find that predators are the most common thing to photograph, are the things you're going to see the most. So whenever even though I'm always trying to take pictures of bobcats, I really try to double my efforts during January and February. And the reasons are pretty simple. During that time of the year, at least where I live in North Texas, the food sources become the most scarce. It's the dead of winter. It's the coldest it is. They're trying to just wake up every day and survive. And so just knowing that biological fact, it becomes a lot easier to find them because instead of bobcats relegated to the margins and coming out at night, you're more likely to see them in open fields as they hunt around looking for stuff. And so what I'll do during this time of year for bobcats is just really try to concentrate my efforts along the edges of fields where the trees meet the grass. It's called edge habitat. It's a really common way of finding all kinds of wildlife, not just bobcats. But I start looking along the edges of fields and again, where those two habitat types meet, you'll find them. Coyotes the same way. You'll see coyotes a lot more common out in open fields during this time as they're looking around. Coyotes are really bobcats. Let me back up a step. Bobcats are carnivorous. They eat primarily meat, but coyotes are a little more opportunistic. They'll eat, and it sounds gross to say this, but they'll eat everything from cow poop to corn if they can find it, to bugs, to just about anything they can find. They'll eat anything. And so when I'm driving around out in the country, I'm looking out in cow pastures because if you see a coyote out in a cow pasture, they're probably not trying to kill the cow because cows are too big for them to take down. Sometimes they'll take out a calf, but probably more often what they're doing is they're trying to eat the grain out of that cow poop, and they'll do that. So, it's a great time to be on the lookout for predators. Another thing about predators is during this time of the month is it's also especially and this is going to depend on the geographic region you're in, but it's also the breeding season. If uh if you've got if you've got house cats, you know what house cats sound like they're really in love and they're ready to breed. Well, bobcats are the same way. If you're in bobcat country, which by the way, we're finding out more and more, it's kind of everywhere because bobcats are really they do a good job of hiding and staying out of sight. But if you're going to hear that sound that bobcats make when they're trying to breed with one another, it's usually going to be in January, February. Coyotes are the same way. If you're in Yellowstone and you see two coyotes hanging out, at least in my experience, more often than not, it's a male and a female because he's trying to pursue her because the breeding season's coming up. Because if you think about it, they breed in the winter and their kittens or their pups are born in the spring. And so the gestation period, I don't know the exact gestation period of both these species, but their gestation period, if you back into it, if they're born in May or June, they're going to have to breed in the wintertime. So that's why this is such a good time to be on the lookout because they're hungry, they're looking for food, they're in love. And when I took all three of these pictures, these animals were this is maybe my favorite bobcat picture on the left I've ever taken. This was about a mile north of here, and she was just out cruising around looking for food one day. I was actually set up watching for some deer to come down this draw, and then she walked out hunting in the area. Same way with this coyote here. This picture here was shot in late February out in Childress, Texas, where I used to live near Redlands, where Redlands Ranch is today. And that coyote was just out in the field hunting one morning looking for food. And then this red fox, of course, if you've been to Yellowstone in the winter much, you know that's a pretty common or fairly common scene there where you see the foxes just out hunting in the snow because they've got to eat and they're always on the move. This is a big male bobcat I shot, uh, I think about 10 years ago. Some of these pictures are older. Bobcats are tough. I had someone come down and I tried to take them out and shoot bobcat pictures with me, and I felt bad in the end. We never saw one, but they are tough, tough, tough. It's to me, it's the holy grail of wildlife shots. When I can get a good picture of a bobcat, I know I've really done something good. And so that one there checks the box. So as March rolls around, the predators become a little bit harder to find because again in my part of Texas and these things will vary based on your geographic location. uh as March comes around, the rabbits, and at least in our part, and they're becoming more and more common, the feral hogs become a lot more common to photograph too. And I say, and this is, this isn't, when I talk about these things, I'm just going by my calendar and what's the most common thing I photographed. But I hope what I'm part on, if you don't have feral hogs where you live, I hope the thing I'm part on that something's moving around during that time of year where you live, and you just got to figure out what it is. And rabbits, right now, or we're into April now, but for the past month around where I live, the rabbits they've come out of hiding for the wintertime. The predators aren't nearly as aggressive and running around as they were back in January and February. By the way, speaking of predators, I'd see a coyote in my yard almost every day during January as she would walk through hunting for stuff, mainly chickens, but she never got one. But come March, small mammals like rabbits, because things are starting to green up, they're becoming a lot more common. And uh, and a lot more visible. And really, that's the thing. I mean, I'd like to tell you all these great tricks for stalking close and getting close to these animals. And there's a few tricks you can use, but really more than anything, it's just paying attention and watching. It's just knowing the things we're talking about today and knowing when the most likely time the animals are going to be moving around and when maybe they're most interesting to photograph. And it's just going out you don't have to go out every day. I don't go out necessarily every day looking for stuff, but on a fairly consistent basis and look around. But I found that again in March, rabbits and feral hogs become really common to see. And then rabbits include is especially out in areas where I traverse jackrabbits as well. I love those things. And you can see that mama there, she's big and fat and pregnant. So she's about to have some babies because it's also coming in a time when they start having babies as well. So they're really active feeding. And as soon as they have babies, they try to breed again. So it becomes pretty common for them to see. or pretty common to see them. And again, continuing with the theme, April and May, small mammals are to me are really the things to key in on during that time, because as the temperature warms up and the predators become less active, the small mammals become more and more active during the time. You know, I mentioned rabbits specifically before, but small mammals now, I saw them this morning. We've got a squirrel just right outside. And by the way, I love all of God's creatures. So it's, you know, if I've got a good chance to take a picture of a squirrel, even though I've got hundreds of them, I'll still take an opportunity to take it. But I noticed today and yesterday, we've got a squirrel that has lost almost all fear of us, as he's learned that when we feed the chickens, there'll be grain left behind. So he's gotten where he'll follow us around and try to figure out where we're feeding the chickens, and pick stuff up off the ground. So he's almost lost all fear of us, which again makes it for a good photographic uh, opportunity. Otters, in my experience, otters this time of year start becoming really active as as the weather becomes warmer and you start getting the fish. As the weather becomes warmer and the becomes warmer, the fish become more active. The crawfish come out of their burrows and they become more active. So there's just more food for them to find. And otters are another one of those animals that they're like bobcats. You wouldn't think there's that many of them, but if you look at the range map, they're, especially across the south, they're becoming more and more common. They're moving everywhere. And then, you know, of course, you got places up north like Yellowstone and the Rocky Mountains where they're really common. But they're out there. You just got to take the time to take a look. I know there's a wildlife refuge that's on a lake about 35 miles from where I live, 35 or 40 miles from where I live, and I'm part of their Facebook group, and there's always people on there that are uh, posting when they see otters. So they're pretty common. You know, where we live, we have armadillos. Armadillos are another one of those animals that are on the march. They're slowly creeping northward. In fact, a couple of years ago, we saw one in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, and I'd never seen one before. I mean, I'd never seen one there before, but the people on the trip had never seen one before, and so it was pretty enjoyable to see everyone really pay a lot of attention to that armadillo. And everybody on the road would be driving by and stop and say, "What y'all looking at?" And we'd have to, you know, they thought we'd saw a bear or something. We'd say, "Oh, we got an armadillo right here," and it didn't impress many people except the wildlife photographers in the bunch. One thing I want you to notice though, as I'm going through all these pictures, is this is a good little side tip that's not even a part of this presentation. But if you notice on all these pictures, one of the things I really try to teach people uh, when you're taking pictures of any kind of wildlife is really try your best to be at eye level. Because when you're at eye level, that does a couple of things. And I'm not perfectly at eye level with all these animals, but I try my best to get as close as I can. When you're eye level, it actually does. I'm going to say three things, probably more than that, but I'm going to say three things you accomplish. Number one, you change the angle between yourself and the subject, which kind of forces the background to a different angle. And if you keep the background in good separation from the animal, you'll get those nice soft backgrounds like we have here. So I try to get as low as I can for that. Number two, probably primarily, uh, it it it's just a more intimate angle of taking a picture of an animal when you're at eye level with them. If I can, in a perfect world, I try to get either at eye level or below to shoot a picture of an animal. And I say that's in a perfect world. Can't always do that, but I at least certainly try my best every single time I'm afield. And then the third thing is, I'm not this guy, but because I usually try to faithfully use a tripod, because I think when you shoot a big telephoto lens, those tripod is one of those tools that'll make you a better photographer, despite all the technology they're building into them today, like in-body stabilization and lens stabilization and all that. I still think using a tripod uh, well, is that one lowest tech piece of equipment that makes the most difference in the way you shoot pictures and the quality of the pictures in which you shoot. But if you disagree with me, that's okay. And so if you insist on hand holding, getting as low as you can with the animal is a more stable position than trying to stand straight up and shoot pictures handheld while you're standing straight up. In the hierarchy of stabilization with your hand holding, the most unstable way you can hold a camera lens is by standing straight up, because there's 300 bones and joints, or there's 300 joints that are conspiring against you to hold that camera steady from your toes to your fingers. And so the lower you get, the lower you lower your center of gravity. It goes from standing up as the least stable, and this isn't an opinion, this is just physics. Standing up is the least stable, way to hold a camera and the most stable way is to lay down on the ground in prone, like a prone rifleman position. Like you remember your little green army guys when you're a kid. That's the most stable way, but a good compromise in between is sit on the ground and get shots like that. Now, I know we're none of us are getting younger and that ground becomes harder and harder to get off the ground to do, but if you're physically able and you can, it's always better to try to get as low as you can to the animal and you get shots like this or shots like that rabbit. I was actually laying on the ground when I shot a picture of that rabbit. Because again, for some reason in March, and this wasn't even shot here at my house, this was shot somewhere else, they just become, when they're concentrating on feeding, they just kind of lose their fear and you can get really close to them. I might have been 10 feet away from that rabbit when I shot that picture. It was shot with a 300 millimeter lens. Okay, and then April and May, back to small mammals. We talked about the otter, we talked about armadillos, badgers, they start becoming more and more active. Uh, you know, there's always exceptions again. If you go someplace like Yellowstone, it may still be covered in snow there, but I guarantee you, if you're there enough, that when the ground starts clearing, you're going to start seeing badgers become more and more active as they're just out looking for, everything's looking for food at that time of year. It's the season of renewal, and so everything's out trying to search for something to eat, whether it's uh, an animal, it's a herbivore or a carnivorous animal like a badger. And then I think you can kind of lead into it. We're also starting to get into baby time during that time of year. And so it brings us into June, and that's babies. I think universally, everybody likes taking pictures of babies. I know I love it. And, one of the things I always try to do as a photographer, and I've been doing it for a long time, and I'm not perfect at it, and I try to be perfect at it, but I'm just not. Is I really feel like I've accomplished something if I can get a collection of pictures that tells the whole life story of that particular species. Like a white-tailed deer. I'll use or I'll use here. I'm going to go back. I'll use prairie dogs as an example because I don't want to sound like a commercial here because there's nothing to sell. I think if you can find them, you find them all used. But I did a coffee table book about prairie dogs 20 something years ago. And when I say coffee table book, it's the big format book. It's got a bunch of pictures in it, about 25,000 words of text. But it's something I did when I was young and I'm still ambitious, but young and really ambitious when thought I wanted to do a bunch of books. And so this was one of the books I did. And so one of the things I knew I needed to do to tell the story of the prairie dog was to get prairie dogs doing everything that prairie dogs can do, feeding, and the predators of prairie dogs and prairie dog babies. And so all of a sudden you start showing up at a particular time of the year, which is usually June, because then the babies are born, they're active, they're on their feet, and they're awfully cute, like this baby bison here is. This was shot in Yellowstone. And I think June's a good time to go out and search for babies every time of during the year. Even the lowly feral hog still has a cute little baby. I'll tell you the story behind this picture. When I shot it, it looks like the mom is cuddling the baby, but what was happening there is the mom was trying to eat something off the ground, and the baby came up to try to eat some along with her, and that's her blocking that baby away from it, and just kind of gave it a little bit of nudge and kind of pushed it back. And but when I took it and I looked at the picture, I thought that's just a sweet little shot of the mom cuddling with the baby, but that just wasn't the case at all. Mom was trying to get her food so she can convert her food to milk because that baby is still nursing off of her. I will say this about feral pigs. I've taken a lot of pictures of them. I've had a lot of feral pigs on the covers of magazines, if you can believe that. Uh, but the thing that's so cool about feral pigs, number one, if you understand where they came from, feral pigs is they can trace their lineage to domesticated pigs, and so once a domesticated pig gets turned loose into the wild, it only takes 2 or 3 generations for it to start reverting back to its wild state. And its wild state means it's going to grow longer hair, it's going to get bigger through the shoulders and leaner through the hips. We breed pigs because all the economically important cuts of a pig is from the rib cage back. So you got the pork chops in the rib cage, or the back of the rib cage back. You got the pork chops in the back of the rib cage, and then you got more pork steak as it goes along, and then the hams are in the back. And so we breed pigs to have a bigger back end than normally they would. Well, Mother Nature says their job is just to root around in the dirt and look for grubs and any other kind of food they can find. So they need to be when they're running wild, they need to be more natural. They need to be thicker in the shoulders and in the neck. And so we'll give them the power to root around. So it takes 2 to 3 generations for a wild pig to revert back to its wild state and start becoming called a feral pig. And so most of these pigs you see in Texas and Oklahoma and across the South can probably trace their lineage to a, a farm somewhere that the pigs just got loose. And over time, you reach this critical mass where they start reproducing and they're all over the land. And they reproduce at an exceptional rate. Uh, they, uh, they, oh, I just heard a chicken walk in, I think. I don't know if that's the first one or not, but I think I just heard one walk in. They reproduce an exceptional rate. A pig's gestation period is 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days. They become sexually mature at about 6 months of age, and if they get bred, 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days later, they have a baby, a litter of up to 6 to 8 pigs, and then they just can do it all over again. But what's amazing, one of the traits they lose is domestic pigs when they're born, they're typically born a solid color, and then you can see by the time they become feral, they start being born with stripes so they can be camouflaged and hide in the weeds. I talked a long time about pigs, but all these were kind of taken in that same season. The baby white-tailed deer, the fawn, the baby prairie dogs, the baby bobcat. Baby bobcat, I got lucky because someone gave me a hint that they had some hanging out in their backyard. And when I went over there, I thought they were seeing something else, but went to the backyard and sure enough, mom had put her baby kittens in a tree in the backyard, and that's one of the pictures that I got. And so this involves a little bit of travel. People ask me a lot, when's the best time to go see brown bears in Alaska? I think it's July, hands down. It's pretty good. So you have two salmon runs that happen in Alaska. You've got a first one that happens in sometime in July, typically, and then you have another one that'll happen in September. And so that first salmon run, I think, is probably the best one. They're both good. So I mean, it's like, it's like a, if you like Mexican food and you got two good Mexican food places in your town, it's like picking the best Mexican food to eat. You can't go wrong either way, is my point. But uh, I think July is better for this one particular reason. The bears are leaner at that time of year, and they're since they're smaller, they're a lot more active. So if you're interested in seeing them really be active on catching fish at Brooks Falls like this one, like this bear's doing, or running around in the water chasing fish, and being really, really active in the pursuit of fish, July is the time to go. Come September, they've already been gorging themselves on fish all during July. And then when that second run comes in September, they're gorging their still, but by September, they're getting ready to hibernate. And so if any of y'all have ever watched the Fat Bear contest from Katmai, they don't run it in July. They wait till September because that's when the bears are getting really, really, really huge. And because they're so big at that time of the year, they're not as nearly as active. They pretty much just stand around and catch fish that come around them. Not saying they're not active at all, but not nearly as active as when they are in July. If you want to get the most action and see the bears running around and see them kind of at their leanest and hungriest, that it just takes place during that time of year. If you go on the Alaskan Peninsula somewhere, whether Katmai, Lake Clark, or one of the many private bear camps that are seem to be springing up everywhere around there. They're all good places to go, and these were all shot during that time of year. So you also get a lot more kind of them fighting over territory uh, in July as well, like you see there. That picture on the left is the first bear picture, or no, the picture on the right, upper right. It's the same bear, upper right and on the left. Those are the same bears. That's the first bear picture I ever took. Took a float plane to Katmai, and I'm wondering to myself, do I think we'll see any bears when we get here? Because you never know. You go to a place new, and you've been told you'll see them there, and we got off the float plane. I looked down the beach to the left, and that's the first one coming to greet us. And so, no, actually, the picture in the water because it got out of the water and shook off. So, picture in the water is first one, and then after it shook off, the picture on the right. But those are both the same bears, and it was just a magical time, and I always loved going up there. And then this is a common species all over the country, but in August, there's something about white-tailed deer when they get in almost full velvet like they do is fascinating to me. And so that's why I put August is a good time to take pictures of deer in velvet. This goes back to the thought I had earlier is if you're really committed to wildlife photography and you like me and you like taking pictures of every single thing there is, uh, it, it, I think it's a good practice to stay in practice and shoot pictures whenever the opportunities arise. And to that extent, August is a great time for white-tailed deer. White-tailed deer and all deer species, and the deer species we see in North America include uh, white-tailed deer, mule deer, elk, moose, caribou, are all the deer species. Uh, Things like bighorn sheep are not deer species. They have horns, not antlers, and so but all the deer species they kind of follow the same sort of biological pattern in that they'll start growing their antlers sometime in the spring, and I say sometime in the spring because depending on the geographic uh, location and the weather, sometimes they start growing a little bit earlier or later than most, and depending on the species too. Good example, where I used to live in Northwest Texas, that has two species of deer there. The whitetail would typically lose their antlers, in mid-February, mid to late February, and the mule deer was common for them to have antlers up till the end of March. And so the two different species start growing their antlers at the same time. But once those antlers start growing, the deer become really, really uh, active in feeding because all of a sudden they're trying to nourish their own body, but they've also got this set of antlers that are growing on top of their head. And it's a phenomenal act of nature to grow the antlers in the beginning because it starts at nothing. They start with a nub on top of their head and a little bump comes up. And in some species of deer, like elk, they'll grow 300 or 400 inches of antler in one growing season, and that antler's made of bone. So growing 300 or 400 inches of bone in one season, I mean, that's a phenomenal growth rate. In fact, I haven't heard the latest on it, but scientists have always looked at that phenomenon, trying to figure out if they can unlock the secrets to that antler growth and apply it to some kind of human medicine. But as the antlers grow, they're soft and the deer try to protect them and they move around gingerly. And that really occurs throughout the growing season. But in August, they really start kind of slowing down and they start moving a little more methodically and with purpose just because they don't want to damage those antlers. Those antlers are full of nerves, they're full of blood, and that covering is called velvet that's on them. And they keep that velvet up until September when it begins to fall off. So sometime in August, you start the white-tailed deer do a couple of things because their antlers are so vulnerable. You start seeing them more in bachelor groups. So if you see one buck, you're likely to see three or four bucks all together, and they'll get up in those bachelor groups. I think it's because their antlers are so tender they can't fight anything off. So I think more sets of eyes just helps them look out for more predators. So I think that's the tendency they tend to group up during that time of year. And but anyway, if you like deer like I like deer, again, that's a good time to start seeing them in velvet. And so they're almost at their the antlers look bigger than what they're going to be because once they rub that velvet off, they look a little bit smaller because then they're hard bone. But during this time of year is when you'll see some animals with some pretty magnificent velvet colored racks like you see in all these pictures here. And it's just a pretty neat time of year to go out, especially in the evenings. Just if you do like I do and you've got places to drive out in the country, I like just going for a drive and finding these animals at the edges of fields where they're out feeding, late in the evening in the summertime in the late summer hours. It's you can get some nice shots like that. And that's how I did all these shots here. Was just driving around looking for them. And then come September, if you like wildlife photography, I would, in all you do since you're here, I would almost argue that September 1st is like the opening day for all of us. It's the start of a new fall season. Fall's coming in a lot of places, particularly up north, and it's coming down south slowly but surely. But fall starts. I know me especially. I get pretty excited when September 1st comes around because then things get really active, especially when it comes to animals like elk. And so uh, again, one of the things I try to do is, I've got a video that encourages people to take 3 shots of wildlife when they can. Take what I call one, the yearbook shot, uh, and that's just a representative picture of an animal to see what it looks like. And number two, I encourage people to get a shot of the animal in its habitat, and so this picture, oops, that last picture I showed would be that, and you'll see some more. Pretty much, it's not just a close up of the animal; it's an animal within its bigger habitat, so you can see where it lives. And number three is some kind of action shot. And so, once you get the first two, it's pretty easy to start focusing on techniques like this of the slow pan and where everything's out of focus. except the eye, which is what needs to be in focus, but everything's out of focus and it creates some dynamic to the image there. Now, I may be wrong about this, but this is another, if you like shooting shots like this, it's another good reason to use a tripod because when you shoot a pan, well, I'm going to save that tripod talk for a better example of this picture in a minute, and I'll tell you why I think using a tripod for shots like this is so important. But uh September's when elk become active. These pictures were taken in Rocky Mountain National Park. You know, the good thing is you can still see elk of this magnitude. I mean, that elk on the left may be one of the biggest elk I've ever seen in my life. It's just a pretty magnificent specimen. And it was shot in Rocky Mountain National Park in the moraine park of Rocky Mountain National Park. Now, the good news is that we have these public places available that we can go shoot pictures like this. The bad news is, and I haven't been in a few years, but it was getting pretty crowded the last time I was there in Rocky Mountain National Park, and I think it's even more crowded today. But you can find quality animals. I know last October I did a private trip for some people to Yellowstone, and they really wanted to concentrate on elk. So we would just get 100 yards off the road and be able to get shots like you see here. I don't have any of those included in this presentation, but you can go to Yellowstone where people are looking for wolves and there's looking for bison, they're looking for all kinds of other stuff. They're going to pay attention to the elk, but most of the crowds for the elk are right there in Mammoth Hot Springs. But if you go just up the hill from Mammoth Hot Springs, uh, there's plenty of elk in those woods. Or if you go down the hill like you're going towards Lamar Valley, there's plenty of elk that are just right off the road. And then as long as you keep the prescribed distance from them, there's nothing says that you can't park a vehicle and walk just 50, 100 yards off the road and get shots of them doing that. So September again is a great time for elk. That's when they're really animated. Depending on where you're at, it's when the elk rut starts. You know, further north it's going to start a little earlier. Further south it's going to start a little bit later. An example of that is if you go to Rocky Mountain National Park, the elk rut's probably going to peak around the end of September. If you go to Smoky Mountain National Park, that peak is probably mid-October is where they kind of peak at the most rut activity because you can go to Smoky Mountain National Park in mid to late October and they're still exhibiting rut behavior uh, they're in the Econolofty or the Cataloochee valleys there during that time of year. So again, that's one of those things that depends on latitude and weather and the sun angle and all that kind of plays into the biological triggers that tells these animals when it's time to rut. And then in October, you get the reverse phenomenon of in the spring, the small mammals, in my experience, start getting a lot more active again. I can tell you unequivocally because I've been watching this really close. When it comes to all kinds of wildlife, like at Redlands Ranch, springtime and fall time the animals are active all time of year there. But when we're talking about all kinds of wildlife, birds included, spring and fall are really the most active times, and it all has to do around they're trying to fatten up for the winter are trying to fatten up after the winter in the spring, and everything's trying to fatten up for the winter before all the food's gone in October. And so things, the woods and the prairies, they all start to get a little more active, and that little uptick in activity just creates more and more opportunities for us. And so in October, I'm going to include small mammals back into it. I'm also going to include deer and elk as well as a good time to photograph these things. So with whitetail deer, again, depending on your geographic location, the rut can start as early as October in a lot of latitudes up north. There's a lot of online resources you can go find. You can go look at any number of hunting websites like realtree.com. They're hunting focused, but what they'll tell you is when they'll have rut calendars to tell you when the elk rut begins and the moose rut begins and the whitetail rut begins and the September and the mule deer rut begins based on your geographic location. So there's all kinds of good resources that'll help you figure out for your location on when the rut begins for all these bigger mammal species. And I just get excited during the rut because typically white-tailed deer are, I don't mean this to be sacrilegious when I say this, but most of the time when I see them here in my place, they're just out in the field and they're feeding. They're not really doing much. Even though I'll take a picture 100% of the time, like everybody else. I kind of like those dynamic pictures. And so during the rut, during this time of year, they start becoming a lot more active because they're looking for love. And one of the things that you notice about white-tailed deer in particular, mule deer too, is their neck gets really big and their neck swells up, and they've been raking their antlers against brush and against trees, just trying to build the muscle strength they can. That's their pre-fight workout they're doing, knowing that if they've got to defend their territory or a potential mate, they may have to fight someone for it. And you don't see those fights year round. You'll see maybe them sparring from time to time, where mainly young deer are just kind of playing around, play fighting. They'll do that some, but the real heavy duty battles, when we're talking about elk or even or elk or mule deer or whitetail or even like really cool animals like bighorn sheep or mountain goats, they're going to fight just during their breeding season as they're taking on the rivals for who's got the right to for the breeding supremacy in a particular herd. And so again, you can go online to figure out when all that kind of peaks for the different species. It's pretty easy to find that kind of information out. But you know, again, that's a picture of a couple of bucks sparring there, but the small mammals, one in particular, because they're so unusual to see. But if I'm going to try to look for them, I think October is the time I'm going to look the most for them because number one, that porcupines, that's their breeding season. And so they're going to be out walking around looking for love, and you'll see them on the ground a lot more. Believe it or not, porcupines are animals of the trees if you've never seen one before. And so when I'm looking for them, I'll look both up in trees where they're going to be eaten, and I'll look on the ground where they're trying to just walk around from tree to tree and look for mates along the way. And how do porcupines breed? Very carefully, I guess. I'm not sure of the answer to that one, but they are out looking for other porcupines during that time of year in October, and so they become a lot more visible. And then one of the things I've done here in the past, and I try to do it every year with varying results, but it's a cool technique if you've got the place to do it, is camera trapping. And so what a camera trap is everybody knows what a game camera is. It's taking the same uh it's taking this the it's taking the same technique as you use a game camera, and then but you're stepping it up a notch. So in other words, instead of going out and buying a game camera, just hang on a tree, you can go to places like camtraptions.com, I think is the name of it. And you can buy housings for your camera that you can put them out in the weather. You can buy the triggers, the infrared triggers that when an animal walks in front of it, you can buy the wireless slave triggers to be able to fire flashes and kind of make it like a studio setup. So in other words, you can make your camera, your DSLR or your mirrorless camera like a trail camera, except it's a lot better quality, the lighting's a lot better, and you don't have all this extraneous information imprinted onto the picture. I found where I like doing that during the white-tailed deer rut because they're at that time of the year, they're really moving all hours of the day. And the really big bucks, they start to disappear during that time of year and you don't see them. And so I always like putting these camera traps out on my place to try to see who's slipping around my house when I'm not awake and can see them. And you get shots like this. That was set up right off a trail as they were walking down it. And so every time a deer would walk in front of it, it would take their picture. And it's a really cool setup. And again, Cam Traptions is the name of that. If you've got a place, usually what I do, just in case it was to get stolen, I'll use an old DSLR camera, and then I bought a lens, secondhand lens, like a third party Tamron lens off of KEH photo. You buy a lens, as long as the glass is good, it doesn't matter how old it is or how slow it autofocuses. So I just usually try to buy a first generation lens that you can buy for $100 and buy a couple of old flashes and get it set up. So if worse comes to worse and someone was to find it, which has never happened to me before, but if something was to find it and something go missing, then you're not out a whole lot of money. You're not missing your good camera stuff. Because when I do the setup with the camera traps, it usually gets set up for weeks at a time. And so it's like Ron Popeil's rotisserie oven you used to see the infomercials about. I'll put the camera out there, I'll set it and forget it, and then go back at least every couple of weeks just to check to make sure the batteries are still going and leave them out for a whole season. I wouldn't do that during the warmer months because the cameras would get too hot, but during the cooler months, I think they're fine. And then it's hit and miss, mostly miss, but every now and then you get a cool shot like something like that. So I think it's a good passive way to shoot pictures and continue enjoying the outdoors and get a good look at what all is on your property. Uh, one more note about camera traps before I get into November. I did that. I did a story for a magazine one time called The Secret Life of Bobcats that I photographed these bobcats on my own property with camera traps almost exclusively. And so I was shooting pictures of bobcats at 16 millimeters, and that's the lens I had inside that housing. And the crazy thing is, I called it the secret life of bobcats because those bobcats lived right under my nose on my own property, and I never saw them. I mean, they would. I was seeing how close that they'd be to my house. They'd be 50 yards away from my house, and just never saw them the whole time. A mom and her two kittens lived there for a whole season, and I never personally laid eyes on them one time, but because I had that camera trap out, and I would put it on trails and 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 I would put in other areas where I thought they'd be around the place, then I was able to get pictures like that of them. So it's a really cool way to take advantage of animals and be able to put a camera out and you don't have to be with it all the time. And so November comes around, I'm a fan of mule deer. Uh, Again, if you live in a place where whitetail and mule deer overlap, from a biological standpoint, it's not ideal for the mule deer because whitetails are more aggressive breeders than mule deer, and the mule deer range, at least the last time I checked, it may have changed since then. The mule deer range is shrinking overall. It has been for a long, long time. As whitetails are more successful and they expand their range, the mule deer range tends to be shrinking a little bit, but there still are places where there's mule deer. And I think November is a fabulous time to be out west, to be try to photograph a mule deer, whether you're at somewhere like the Rocky Mountain Arsenal National Wildlife Refuge near Denver or any of the state parks. Mule deer, because they're less aggressive, they're a lot more laid back than whitetail, and because the way they've evolved, they're kind of they're an open country kind of animal. So they've got really good vision and they've got really good way to evade you. And so they're more comfortable standing there and watching you from a distance as opposed to a whitetail. A lot of times if a whitetail sees you, they'll take off when they first see you. But mule deer are more likely just to hang around and see what you're up to. And because of that, they make great photographic subjects. And this is during the mule deer rut because that's when it starts to kick up for mule deer is in November as well. So they start fighting a little bit more and being a little more aggressive. Again, mule deer overall are a pretty laid back animal, but they can be aggressive with one another once the breeding starts. And they're really, really animated animals. And so that's when they're on the move all the time and you get really, really nice shots like this. And these two in the lower right, these two brutes here. Oh, I just saw a chicken walk in. I don't know if that's the first one or not. These two brutes here on the lower right, they're they were squaring off for a minute, but they decided it wasn't worth fighting each other. And I was really hoping to see those two fight, and I was really lucky to get that view where you can look past one right at the other one as they're staring at each other. But look at the size of the necks on these things. I mean, it's just humongous. Oh, I apologize for that. Just making sure y'all see her back there. That'll go right to it. And then December, excuse me for just oh, she's gonna quit. And then December, predators and ungulates. Oh, hang on a second. Only here at Hackberry Farm, we see that kind of stuff. In December, predators and ungulates all over again. They'll predators again gets to that time of year when food starts getting scarce and they're a whole lot more uh active and visible during that time of year as well. And then that's especially in Texas. For some reason, we get a lot of snow in December from time to time. That's one of my 16 millimeter bobcats there. That was she was eating a dead animal in that picture, but that was taken with 16 millimeters. In fact, when I shot that picture, what she's looking at was I was walking down to check the camera, and that's when she was watching me come in, and I walked up on the camera and never even saw her. But ungulates are a good time there because the rut's over, and then the whitetail bucks become really active again because they and or ungulates like whitetail deer and elk and mule deer become really active again because at that time of the year they're trying to just replenish their stores for the winter. So they go through this rut where they're really active. The rut's over, but then they'll still kind of be active for a little bit, just trying to replenish what they lost during the rut because they'll lose a lot of weight during the rut because they quit eating and all they're doing is chasing the females. And then right after that, before winter really sets in, they're out looking to try to feed again. So Again, this is a whitetail in December. I mean, this is a coyote in December that I shot just right after a snow, and I was just driving around looking in the fields, and that's when they're out looking for food. This was the picture I was going to show you uh, of why I think it's a good practice to use a tripod because this is the best example of a pan I ever shot before. This coyote was running by. I knew I wanted to try to get this shot, and if forgive me while I talk a little geometry right quick, but when we shoot in 3D space, we're shooting it. If you remember from geography back in school, you're shooting on the planes of X, Y, and then in and out Z. And then when you're hand holding the lens, you're moving all around in that 3D space, and there's nothing to, there's no plane that you can lock in on without moving around. But by putting on the tripod, when you're panning along the X plane, you can at least keep it as steady as you can on that. And so I found out, and I've tried it both ways. Hand holding, I get a lot fewer keepers if I get any at all when I'm hand holding a telephoto lens trying to do a panning shot like this. But if I put it on a tripod, I still have a lot of bad ones, but my keeper rate goes up to 25, 30% that they're going to be good enough where it looks like that one. That's one of the most favorite pictures I've ever taken right there of that coyote and that pan shot of that coyote. And then here's a few tips for taking mammal pics. And again, apologize for the chickens coming in and raiding our party. I knew one would walk in, but I didn't know they'd come in and make all kinds of racket like that. Tips for taking mammal pics. Number one, wear camouflage, and you don't have to be head to toe camouflage, but and I say wear camouflage is a good starting point. But if you've got a shirt like this on that's green, it's kind of subdued, sort of a natural color, it just makes you stand out a whole lot less. Now, there's a lot of times when you're taking pictures of animals that they know you're there, but the more you can kind of blend in and the more comfortable they become around you. If you're wearing a strange color they're not used to seeing in nature, they're probably going to notice it, you know. If you're wearing if you're really stand out, every movement you make, and I say every movement, not just walking up on them or walking away from them or walking side to side. I mean, every hand movement, they're going to pay attention to you because it's just something foreign they're not seeing. And so I have found over time, if you wear camouflage, again, you're not trying to completely hide from them. Sometimes you do need to, like in the case of predators, it's the more camouflage you can be, the better. But for the most part, if you're wearing subdued colors that you can just kind of blend into the background and just become part of the scenery, I found out I found that they get a lot more relaxed and a lot more laid back after that. This is a really big thing. Do your homework and know the animal. One of the things I can tell you about every one of these pictures I shot is I tried to put the odds in my favor overall. In other words, if I'm going to try to take pictures of bobcats, I learn what's the best habitat for bobcats. Where are they likely going to, where am I going to see them the most in my general area? And at what times of the year am I most likely going to see them? And I try to learn all I can about them to the point, and I try to know all I can about my cameras. And so you get to a point at some point where you've covered all the things you've controlled all the things you can control, and the only thing you can't control at that point is whether or not you're going to see that animal or not. And so by knowing as much as you can, you and understanding where animals are likely to be and what time they're going to be there, what times of the day they're going to be there, what time of the year they're going to be there, you just put the odds in your favor. It's as simple as this in my mind. I've told people this before because we'll go somewhere like Yellowstone and I can say, okay, we're going to drive down here and we're probably going to see this, and it comes to pass. And people start thinking you have a sixth sense for doing that. Well, it's as simple as if I know where I'm going to pick on Lloyd. If I know where Lloyd lives, the neighborhood Lloyd lives in, then if I drive around in that neighborhood enough, I'm likely going to see Lloyd outside of his house going to his car or something like that. And so it's not making me a genius to find Lloyd. I've just figured out where his neighborhood he lives in, and the more time I spend in that neighborhood, the more likely I'm going to see him. And Lloyd, I'm not stalking you by the way, so just keep that in mind. Uh, Utilize blinds when you can. And this is, I know there's a company that sells blinds made for photographers. You can certainly use those, but you can also go to like a Bass Pro Shops or Cabela's and buy a cheap $60 blind that works good as well. And I try to use blinds a lot. If I'm taking pictures of really wild animals like wild white-tailed deer that are on private land outside of a national park, they may notice the blind there, but again, just because they're not seeing a human form, they become a lot more relaxed and they're not running away from you as soon as you see them. So I think blinds are really important. Plus, I really like just sitting in blinds and watching nature unfold. That's kind of relaxing to me. We were I had I was out at Redlands Ranch just a couple weeks ago. Yeah, 2 or 3 weeks ago. And just kind of an impromptu blind sit. I had a guy go out there with me and we just sat in the blind and it was kind of active. It wasn't as active as you'll see it in April and May, but it was kind of active. But I told them, I said, even if we saw one animal come by, I just like sitting in a blind and watching the world go by. It's just relaxing to me. So blinds are really important too. And then target food sources. That's a big thing too, especially with animals like deer or rabbits or anything else. If you can figure out where their favorite restaurants are, you can put yourself in a better position to see them more often and more consistently. And so when I say target food sources, uh, look for those, figure out what the animal you want to photograph eats, and then figure out where those food sources are at the area you're going to photograph. It's pretty easy. Here's a good example. If you're going to photograph bison in Yellowstone, you go to Lamar Valley. Why? Because that's where the open areas are with plenty of grass. Or Hayden Valley. That's where to go to. And again, if I'm photographing white-tailed deer on a piece of private property just north of my place, I'm going to look for those big mass producing trees like acorns or hickory that are going to be dropping nuts on the ground, because more likely than not, the animal in their daily routine of moving around their habitat, they're going to stop by there for a bite to eat. And so that targeted food sources applies not only to mammals, but really just about any kind of animal that you're gonna try to photograph. And then target breeding seasons. And again, this is valuable for not only mammals but also birds as well. And you don't disturb them during breeding season, but if you know when their breeding season is, like for turkeys, for example, or prairie chickens, they're a lot more dynamic during their breeding season and they're a lot more active, and it just makes them easier to see. And then one of the things I do, I get asked this question a lot. Do I shoot manual or aperture priority or shutter priority? Personally, I shoot aperture priority. I think the debate over what's best, manual, shutter priority, or aperture priority, which one's the best, I think the debate is a little bit asinine. I think the key thing is you understand how all of them work and work them accordingly. But whether you shoot manual, is it best to shoot manual, aperture, or shutter? Yes, they're all good. As long as you know how it works and the cause and effect when you change the aperture or you change the ISO and what it does to everything else. I think that's really the most important thing, is you understand how your cameras work. I shoot aperture priority and I use that photo statistica. I can look at that and tell you that 85% of the almost million images I've ever shot on digital have been shot in aperture priority. And the reason why is I can react quicker when I shoot that way. So what's important to me is one of the things you're going to see in common on just about all these pictures of these animals is I like backgrounds like that, really soft, out of focus backgrounds. And so typically what I'll do is, in aperture priority, I'll set the aperture. I want to open my lens wide open. I'll set the aperture. Manually set the ISO. I'm not a big fan of auto ISO. Not that it's wrong. It's just the way I shoot and the way I've been shooting. I like to set the ISO, and then I'll let the camera decide what the shutter speed is going to be. So then that's one less button I've got to turn to mess up when the action gets pretty heated. That's one less thing again, there's one less thing I'm going to mess up when it's really important to get the image. And so really all I'm concentrating on there is the camera going to get the exposure right? Do I need to put in exposure compensation? That's my only decision I have to make when I shoot aperture priority. Again, not saying that manual or shutter is bad. It's kind of the way I learned to shoot and the way I've always done it. It's as simple as, if you look at Google Maps and I was to put, how do I get from Dodge City, Texas to Denver, Colorado, it's going to give me three choices, but all three choices are going to get me to the same spot. And so that's the way I look at there. And so I think, again, what's important is you pick the mode that's right for you, and then you just get really good at that mode and understand everything about it. And that's for aperture mode. That's me. Because if what I was going to say earlier is, if I was to shoot all manual, and I've done it before, I'll invariably turn the wrong knob or the wrong button and mess something up and not get the picture I want when it really, really counts. So I shoot aperture priority so I can react quickly. And typically, because I do shoot on a tripod, my ISO range is usually it's kind of my starting point, 4 to 800. I will go higher. I regularly shoot at 3200 in certain conditions. I will go higher than that, but if you've ever been with me much, and again, Not debating the merits of what's right or wrong. I'd never say that because that's the cool thing about photography. There's so many different ways of doing the same thing. It's just you picking your right way. But this goes back to my film days. I shoot a low ISO because it's only been recently until the cameras have gotten really better at higher ISOs. And so I'm still kind of stuck in the old model. But number two, as much as anything, I try to get it as perfect as I can in the camera, which limits me how much time I'm going to spend in post processing, which the less time I spend at the computer, the more time I get to spend in the glorious outdoors and coming up with topics like this, like the mammal calendar and how to react to that. Hey, I throw this up here. I don't know if everyone's got these or not that are signed up, but if you want a set of cheat sheets that talks about some of the things I talked about in terms of uh, exposure compensation, aperture priority, composition, things like that. Feel free to download those cheat sheets there. And by the way, if you've got them, I've got another freebie coming up soon, so I'll announce that coming up pretty quick, so you can get a new freebie because I think that the cheat sheets have done their job. They've ran their course. They're out into the wild. A lot of people have them, and so thousands of people have them at this point. So I'm pretty excited about that. So it's time to come up with something new. And in the end, write this down if you have any questions beyond today about anything, or if you want to share a story about anything. If you want to tell me where I got it right or got it wrong today, feel free to chime in there. And there's my website, hackberryfarmtexas.com, Russell at russellgraves.com. And before I go to stay in touch, I got 6 new messages here. Let me see what all we got. Oh, it looks like John Allman was the first one. John, if you're still listening, send me an email at that email address, and I'll get you this coupon. I'll email it back to you so you can use it right away. So good job there. He is the first one to chime in, uh, and everybody else is just saying chicken again. Audrey says, "What was your shutter speed for the panning coyote photo?" Audrey, that's a good question. I've been asked that a lot. It was 1/15th of a second, is what it was. Uh, and again, 1/15th of a second wide open. And I can't even remember what my ISO would be. I forgot to look at it that way, but it was like it right at first light. So it was pretty uh low light during that time. And as the coyote, like I said, the coyote was running past me and I knew I wanted to do that. So I just dialed in as quick as I could. And when he got past me, I just panned past him. And I'll explain that a little more. What I was talking about earlier is you've got an X axis, a Y axis, I think I've got those right. And then the Z-axis is in and out. If you're hand holding, you're more apt to be moving in and out on your Z-axis. And if you're trying to pan left to right, you're more apt to just kind of be bouncy on your X-axis. And so you're moving from X to Y the whole time. If you have it on a tripod and you're not going to move in and out, you're limiting that. So you're letting your camera work more efficiently for you because the camera, even moving a quarter of an inch, the camera's going to, shooting at a telephoto lens, the camera's going to try to compensate for that. So you're letting their camera be more accurate for you. And then you're instead of, again, there's maybe small bounces, but instead of these little micro bounces, if you're panning left to right on a tripod, you take away a lot of that sort of up and down movement that you would naturally do just because you're excited and you're human and and you're excited and you're human and that's just what happens when you do all that. Uh let's see what else we got. So I hope that explains. Uh Setting 2 on lens stabilization. I think I just always leave mine on setting 1. I don't really, this is terrible for me to say, but I don't really pay attention to those lens settings that much, those stabilization settings. I probably should, but that's one of many things. That's my fault because that's one of many things that if I change it to something else, I always forget to change it back. So I just kind of leave it at a general setting. That's I've shot millions of pictures in my life, and I still will. I did it the other day. Got my camera out. I've been shooting landscape shots. We had I think it was a bear show up. We're in Smoky Mountains. Had a bear show up, and the first picture I took of that bear was click, and it was like a 3-second exposure because we've been shooting waterfalls before. I forgot to set everything back, and I do it all the time, and so that's why I think on my lenses, which are Canon lenses, I think I leave them on setting 1, Audrey. All right. Does anybody else have any other questions? It is 1:01. 8 p.m. Wow, we did this for an hour. So, hey, like I said, feel free to stay in touch. Be checking your inbox. If you signed up for this already, you'll get it first. I will post this to the website. I'll send in my meeting notes back to you as well, so you'll have a copy of those if you want to review everything. And as always, stay in touch. Holler if you need anything. Holler if you have any questions. And I appreciate everybody joining in today. Thank y'all. Take care.